Gold used to be the final answer. Portable, stable, and universally accepted, it defined private wealth for centuries. But not anymore. As regulation tightens, cross-border movement becomes traceable, and bullion ownership enters public record. A silent shift is underway. Across vaults in Singapore, safes in Geneva, and private collections in Hong Kong, a new set of assets is emerging. They're harder to track than gold, easier to move than cash, and in some cases, more valuable gram for gram than anything in a central bank. These aren't commodities, they're decisions, made by family offices, sovereign buyers, and legacy investors who've stepped outside traditional markets. This is the new language of wealth, not loud, not liquid, just precise and private. These are the 10 gemstones quietly replacing gold in personal wealth portfolios. And chances are, you won't find them where gold used to be. Top 10. Red SPINEL, the understated asset now outshining gold. Gold is tracked, diamonds are flagged, but one gemstone has quietly slipped past both. Not by force, but by design. Red SPINEL doesn't demand attention. It doesn't come with the branding of ruby, the volatility of emerald, or the red tape of bullion. And yet, in 2025, it's quietly outperforming both. Not on paper, not on Wall Street, but where it matters most, in the confidential portfolios of private wealth. The most valuable red SPINELs are found in Mogok, Myanmar, and Luc Yen, Vietnam, two regions where industrial mining never took over. Here, gemstones are still pulled from narrow shafts by hand, washed in riverbeds, and negotiated in back rooms before they ever see a scale. The production volume is small, often too small to meet institutional demand. But that's precisely what makes SPINEL ideal for discrete asset conversion. Top-grade stones are 100% natural, untreated, and have a vivid red tone that matches and often surpasses the best rubies in brilliance. A clean, unheated Burmese SPINEL above 5 carats can quietly command $70,000 to $90,000 mounted in private auctions, especially when paired with old provenance or pre-sanctioned origin. That's more than gold, gram for gram, carat for carat, and yet it's rarely documented, never declared. Unlike gold, red SPINEL doesn't trigger automatic reporting. It isn't categorized under high-risk movable assets. It can be carried across borders, across trusts, across generations, without activating compliance protocols. In the last 5 years, we've seen a new pattern emerge. Family offices are removing gold from vaults and replacing it with SPINEL, not for fashion, but for flexibility. SPINEL offers something bullion can't. High value and low volume, no industrial trace, no centralized registry, and above all, anonymity. The rise isn't speculative, it's strategic. Governments can freeze accounts. They can track bank wires. They can flag diamonds and scan gold. But a 7-carat red SPINEL in a ring setting, passed quietly between generations? That doesn't show up in audits. We're not looking at a gemstone anymore. We're looking at a store of private wealth, designed not for display but for discretion. Red SPINEL has already overtaken gold in specific private holdings, not because it shines brighter, but because it doesn't shine at all, until the right buyer appears. Top 9th Paraiba. Tourmaline, the neon currency of the ultra-rich. There are only a handful of assets in the world that don't need authentication to prove their value. Paraiba tourmaline is one of them. Not because it's common, but because it's unmistakable. With its electric blue, neon green, and glowing turquoise hues, Paraiba tourmaline does something no other gemstone can. It burns color, even under low light, even through glass, even to the untrained eye. The origin? Trace amounts of copper and manganese in particular geological conditions were first discovered in Paraiba, Brazil, in the late 1980s. That mine is now commercially depleted. What remains is a fragment of geological luck, now priced like strategic real estate. Since 2001, 2 other locations, Mozambique and Nigeria, have produced similar stones, but the finest Paraiba still come from the original Brazilian pocket. These stones are not industrially mined. Each one is extracted by small-scale operations, mostly family-held, with yields so low that a full year's output may total less than 1 kilogram of rough. But here's what makes Paraiba different from sapphire or emerald. It's not treated, it's not enhanced, and it cannot be replicated. No lab-grown version has come close to the natural glow, and that's precisely why it's become the unofficial currency of the ultra-rich. In private auctions, a Brazilian Paraiba over 3 carats, untreated, with vivid saturation and clean crystal structure, now sells for $100,000 to $200,000 per carat. Yes, per carat. And unlike gold, it doesn't trigger alerts. Unlike diamonds, it doesn't follow the Kimberley process. There's no centralized registry, no transaction footprint, and no cap on transport. Paraiba tourmalines can move freely, in rings, earrings, loose stones, between Geneva vaults and Hong Kong collections, without touching any formal banking system. That's not just wealth, that's sovereign-grade mobility. For family offices managing intergenerational portfolios, Paraiba tourmalines are now being used as quiet capital hedges, moved offshore, pledged against liquidity lines, or secured in private trust vaults as color-class assets. There is no formal index, no ETF, no Bloomberg ticker, just private data and rising offers. Even among gem dealers, Paraiba has become a term spoken differently. It's no longer a stone, it's a signal of class, of access, and of financial intelligence. In circles where visibility is a liability, the ultra-rich don't buy it for style, they buy it for silence, for transferability, and because when the time comes to move fast and undetected, neon always wins. Top 8. Kashmir Sapphire, the blue asset quietly outpacing gold. In wealth management, timing is everything, and in the case of Kashmir Sapphire, the window has long since closed, which is precisely why it's now outpacing gold. The Kashmir mines operated for less than 50 years, from the late 1870s to the early 1930s, tucked deep within the Himalayan frontier of what was then princely India. No mechanized equipment, no satellite mapping, just a single landslide that exposed one of the most prized gemstone deposits in history. And then, it vanished. Today, genuine Kashmir sapphires no longer come from the ground. They come from estates, from old vaults, from forgotten dowries, and from auctions where only 5 or 6 buyers in the world are authorized to bid, quietly and often anonymously. What sets Kashmir sapphires apart is not just the cornflower blue hue, but the unmistakable velvety texture, a result of minute inclusions that scatter light in ways no lab-grown stone can reproduce. The best stones aren't flawless. They're atmospheric. A certified Kashmir sapphire of 4 to 6 carats with intense color saturation now sells for $150,000 to $500,000 per stone, depending on provenance and mounting. That's not per kilogram. That's not per ounce. That's per piece, often the size of a thumbnail. And unlike gold, Kashmir sapphires don't move in bulk. They're not subject to capital gain triggers. They don't appear on banking ledgers. They are invisible until liquidated. And when they move, they do so across generations, not quarters. The most strategic buyers aren't collectors. They're wealth stewards, family offices, sovereign legal trusts, and intergenerational asset managers who understand that. Scarcity is more than supply. It's permanence. You can mine more gold. You can cut more diamonds, but you can't manufacture a Kashmir sapphire. You can't even legally mine for one. The region has been geopolitically restricted for over half a century. That's what gives the Kashmir sapphire its financial edge. Finite supply, legacy tier demand, immunity from modern surveillance. For those who hold it, it functions as frozen liquidity, stable, untraceable, and quietly appreciating outside of market cycles. It doesn't fluctuate with the dollar. It doesn't collapse with crypto. And unlike bullion, it doesn't scream wealth in a custom scan. In the era of traceability, Kashmir sapphires represent a different kind of value. Not just beauty, not just history, but strategic silence, wrapped in velvet blue. Top 7. Imperial Jadeite, the green asset that defies control. Most assets follow borders. This one built its own. Imperial jadeite is not just rare, it's politically sensitive, culturally protected, and financially untraceable. And yet it moves, not through banks, but through clans. Not on ledgers, but between risks and safes for sums that rival real estate portfolios. The source? One country, Myanmar, specifically the region of Kachin State. The color? A saturated, semi-translucent green, known only in trade as imperial. No dye, no glass filling, no diffusion. The structure is microcrystalline, delicate enough to glow in daylight, solid enough to outlast war. But here's the paradox. Since the late 1990s, Myanmar's jadeite exports have been under political sanction, embargo, or internal conflict. A handful of military-linked entities controls mining. Legal exports are limited. And yet, the global supply never stops. That's because imperial jadeite defies formal control. It's smuggled through Laos, Yunnan, and Vietnam. It's cut in Hong Kong, sold in Shanghai, hidden in private collections across Bangkok, Singapore, and Geneva. And unlike diamonds or gold, it rarely shows up in customs declarations. A single jadeite bangle, untreated imperial green, translucent, can command $500,000 to over $1 million, especially if carved pre-2000s or sourced from historic family collections. But value here isn't just optical, it's cultural liquidity, accepted as payment in family transactions, dowries, offshore exchanges, and even debt settlement. In the Chinese-speaking world, jade is not jewelry, it's intergenerational capital, a form of unspoken trust, one that doesn't require certificates but lineage. And so, while Western regulators try to lock down gold flows and centralize diamonds, jadeite slips through with no universal grading system, no consistent pricing, and no official tracking. You can freeze a bank account, you can sanction a commodity, but you can't stop a mother from passing a jade bangle to her daughter. That's what makes imperial jadeite dangerous and powerful. It moves through relationships, not institutions. It's stored in homes, not vaults. It's proof of value, with no need for permission. In recent years, ultra-high net worth families across Asia have begun offloading bullion and instead buying jadeite privately, often in pairs. One to wear, one to hold. Why? Because it holds its value in markets that don't believe in markets, because it travels without wires, and because no algorithm, sanction, or policy has ever stopped a piece of jade from changing hands. Imperial jadeite isn't just an asset. It's a sovereign green, immune to oversight, and built to endure the world's instability. Top 6. Alexandrite, the shape-shifting asset in a static system. Most assets are static. You know their value, you know their location, and once you report them, the system is also notified. Alexandrite refuses all of that. At first glance, it's just a gemstone, but tilt it slightly, and everything changes. Under daylight, it's greenish-blue. Under incandescent light, it shifts to red, or purple, or both. No enhancement, no coating, just pure optical physics, embedded deep in the crystal lattice. Discovered in Russia's Ural Mountains in the 1830s and named after Tsar Alexander II, the original alexandrites are now virtually depleted. Since then, new sources have emerged in Brazil, Sri Lanka, and Tanzania. But none produce the same dramatic shift as the Russian stones. And no treatment or synthetic has ever replicated its full range of natural color change. That's what gives alexandrite its power. It cannot be copied, and it cannot be faked at scale. From a financial standpoint, alexandrite doesn't behave like other colored stones. It doesn't sell in volume. It doesn't flood the market during upswings. And it's almost impossible to standardize, because every stone shifts differently under different lighting to different eyes. That ambiguity is why alexandrite is increasingly used as a movable wealth asset in jurisdictions where capital movement is restricted. It's small, it's dense in value, and it's nearly impossible to audit without physical inspection. A fine-quality Russian alexandrite over 2 carats with substantial color shift and minimal inclusions now commands $100,000 to $200,000 per stone on the private market. Stones over 4 carats? They're rarely listed publicly, not because they don't exist, but because they seldom change hands without a reason. More than a gem, Alexandrite functions like dynamic capital, capable of adapting across markets, cultures, and legal systems. It doesn't appear on public registries. It isn't on any stock exchange. And yet, it holds value on par with blue-chip art or legacy bullion, without the traceability. In a world where everything is being tracked, from IP addresses to facial recognition to AI-led transaction analysis, Alexandrite resists classification. It doesn't have a fixed face. It doesn't behave under fixed light. And that's precisely why the system can't pin it down. More and more elite investors are adding Alexandrite to their invisible portfolios, asset classes held physically, not digitally. It sits beside vintage watches, rare stamps, pre-ban ivory, and pre-war gold coins, all things that fluctuate in value outside the reach of algorithms. Alexandrite doesn't move like Bitcoin. It doesn't store like bullion. It isn't registered like diamonds. It creeps. And when it shifts, it brings value with it. Across borders, across decades, across regimes. In a financial system obsessed with certainty, Alexandrite remains deliberately uncertain. And that's precisely what makes it dangerously effective. Top 5. Unheated Burmese Ruby, the red standard behind closed vaults. Not all rubies are created equal, and not all rubies are traded in public. Some are so rare, so clean, and so politically sensitive. They never make it to the open market. They're stored, they're moved, they're insured, but they're never shown. We're talking about unheated Burmese rubies, the red that doesn't need help. No lead glass, no beryllium, no heat furnace, just geological perfection pulled from a closed chapter of the Earth's crust and guarded more like sovereign bonds than stones. The origin? Mogok, Myanmar, a valley known not just for gemstones, but for geopolitical silence. Once open to international gem buyers, Mogok now operates behind multiple layers of restriction. Access is limited. Extraction is tightly watched. An embargo shadows export. But the rubies still move, because their value has outgrown regulation. Unheated Burmese rubies over 2 carats, with strong fluorescence, pigeon blood tone, and clean crystal, are now priced at $250,000 to $1 million per stone. Above 5 carats, they rarely change hands. And when they do, it's through Geneva vault exchanges, family trusts, or private diplomatic couriers. These rubies don't need a market. They are the market. In high net worth circles, an unheated Burmese ruby functions as a challenging red asset class, a reference point for wealth solidity, liquidity insulation, and cross-border discretion. The key isn't just color, it's absence of treatment. In a gem world flooded with enhancement, a ruby that stands untouched becomes a statement, not of beauty, but of control. That's why the top-tier stones are no longer sold. They're held, vaulted, assigned insurance codes, included in private family audits, but never entered into auction databases. For insurance firms handling ultra-high-value assets, these rubies now carry internal risk grades equal to or exceeding Class A artwork. They move in armored couriers, they're bonded offshore, and they're written into wills with strict succession clauses. You won't find them in retail, you won't see them in showrooms. And unless you're underwriting 8 or 9-figure estates, you may never see one at all. Because for those who operate behind closed vaults, the definition of red isn't just visual, it's foundational. Unheated Burmese ruby is no longer just a gem. It's a benchmark, a fixed store of legacy-grade value, immune to trend, immune to tracking, and trusted where trust has no paperwork. Top 4. Blue Garnet, the invisible gem bought before it's seen. Most gems are shown before they're sold. Blue Garnet breaks that rule, because by the time it reaches the public eye, it's already gone. Blue Garnet isn't just rare, it's statistically invisible. Discovered only in the late 1990s near Bakaili, Madagascar, and in even rarer occurrences in Sri Lanka and the United States, Its entire global supply fits in a single safe deposit vault, and many believe that's precisely where most of it already is. Unlike other garnets, blue garnet exhibits a reverse color change phenomenon. It appears blue-green in daylight and shifts to purple-red under incandescent light, a unique interplay of vanadium and rare trace elements, impossible to replicate and nearly impossible to find. The science is extraordinary, but the market behavior is what truly matters. Blue garnets rarely enter circulation. They are pre-purchased before grading, often through direct contact between mine operators and private wealth buyers, most of them acting on behalf of family offices in the Middle East, Southeast Asia, and private banks in Geneva. In most cases, the stones are sold uncut, based solely on chemical spectroscopy, not on appearance. The buyer never sees the finished gem. They take the entire lot. Why? Because blue garnet has become a locked commodity. One of the few stones whose rarity is so absolute, its value increases faster when it's not shown. As of 2025, a fine quality cut blue garnet over 2 carats with confirmed daylight to incandescent shift commands $80,000 to $150,000 per carat, if you can even find one listed. Above 3 carats, there are fewer than 10 known in private hands, and not a single one has come to public auction in the last decade. That's not a pricing gap, that's a system exclusion. Blue garnets are not part of the traditional gem trade. They're not featured at Basel, not included in standard gemological indexes, and rarely covered in industry reports. They exist almost entirely off-market, purchased, stored, and insured through alternative asset channels. In some cases, they are assigned shadow valuations, similar to art held in museum-grade storage, with prices indexed only through private sale history. To many, blue garnet is not a gemstone. It's a proof of access token. You don't buy it unless you've been invited. You don't see it unless you're trusted. And you don't hold it unless you already own what money can't buy. For investors specializing in non-reportable assets, blue garnet is a crown jewel. No paper trail, no comparable benchmark, no digital footprint, just a physical object whose value increases in silence. In an era obsessed with transparency, blue garnet represents the exact opposite. It's wealth you can't track, can't predict, and can't buy, unless you already know precisely where to look. And by the time you've heard about it, it's already gone. Top 3, PADPARADSCHA Sapphire, the sunset asset with no market clock. Most assets follow a clock. Prices rise, fall, correct, cycle, and repeat. PADPARADSCHA doesn't, because no one can agree on what it is, only what it means. The PADPARADSCHA sapphire is often described as a mix of lotus blossom and sunset, a hue somewhere between pink, orange, and salmon, depending on who's looking and under what light. But this isn't just a matter of color, it's a matter of origin, tradition, and perception. The original stones come from Sri Lanka, historically known as Ceylon, where the term PADPARADSCHA, from the Sinhalese word Padmaraga, wasn't a color code, but a spiritual association. A PADPARADSCHA wasn't just rare, it was revered. Today, these stones also appear in Madagascar and Tanzania, but the market still treats Ceylon origin stones as the only accurate representations. Why? Because unlike rubies or emeralds, PADPARADSCHA sapphires can't be reduced to hue, tone, and saturation scales. They live in a cultural consensus, one that can't be standardized. And that's precisely why they don't follow a market clock. Prices don't spike, they drift, they pause for years. Then suddenly, when a collector resurfaces or a region remembers, they double. As of 2025, a top-grade unheated Ceylon PADPARADSCHA over 3 carats sells privately for $150,000 to $300,000. Depending entirely on the buyer's origin, cultural familiarity, and emotional threshold. This is not a speculative gem. It's a sentimental reserve, often passed between generations, rarely listed, and even more seldom understood outside its original cultural zone. In Southeast Asia and parts of the Middle East, PADPARADSCHA is considered a marital stone, a symbol of balance, or a marker of feminine strength, placed into dowries, family gifts, or blessing rituals. These stones are rarely insured, rarely exhibited, and rarely exported under formal valuation. They are transferred like beliefs, not commodities. That's why no algorithm can predict their rise, no index can time their peak, and no auction house can set a floor price that holds across cultures. For elite wealth stewards, PADPARADSCHA sapphires function like cultural equity, value held not in global liquidity, but in the continuity of memory. They aren't meant to circulate, they're meant to endure, not to hedge against markets, but to exist beyond them. So when asked why there's no ETF for PADPARADSCHA, no futures contract, no price transparency, the answer is simple. You can't schedule a sunset, and you can't timestamp a tradition. PADPARADSCHA sapphire remains the only high-value gemstone whose price is measured in emotion, not time, and that makes it both unpredictable and irreplaceable. Top 2. GRANDIDIERITE, the asset no algorithm understands. Most financial systems run on models, inputs, outputs, patterns, projections. But GRANDIDIERITE breaks the model, because even with perfect data, the price still doesn't make sense. Discovered in 1902 near Tolignaro, Madagascar, GRANDIDIERITE was classified early, but has been rarely observed. For over a century, it was known more from textbooks than from trade. No market, no listings, no price history. Then came the 2014 discovery, a pocket of gem-quality material found again in southern Madagascar. And everything changed, or at least it should have. Supply increased, demand spiked, yet pricing refused to behave. Even now, there is no consistent per-carat price for GRANDIDIERITE. A 0.5 carat stone might sell for $8,000. A 2-carat stone, of similar quality, might go unsold at $15,000. Then a 4-carat stone with minor inclusions trades for over $100,000, without explanation. Not because of clarity, not because of color, but because of timing, origin rumors, or even a buyer's obsession. No auction house tracks it, no grading system defines it, and no algorithm can predict its movement. That's because GRANDIDIERITE isn't just rare, it's structurally unpredictable. It forms in pegmatite gabbro contact zones with complex borosilicate matrices, conditions that geologically resist repeatability. Even in Madagascar, new finds show up meters away from empty zones. To investors, this means only one thing: no reliable model. That's why most GRANDIDIERITE transactions are off-book, relationship-based, and often priced against memory, not data. Some buyers only purchase Sri Lankan origin stones for reasons rooted in old trade lore. Others only collect deep bluish-green specimens with specific birefringence traits, visible only under polarized scopes. And then some buyers don't even care if it's certified. They want the glow. This isn't a market. It's an echo chamber of conviction. As of 2025, fewer than 50 stones above 5 carats are confirmed in private collections, and none have been publicly traded since 2020. Most are sealed in vaults, listed under rare silicate assets, unindexed, uninsured, and outside all systems of financial calibration. For wealth advisors managing portfolios resistant to surveillance, GRANDIDIERITE functions as value ambiguity, the one asset class that cannot be profiled, forecasted, or replicated. You can't create a price curve. You can't program a trading bot. You can't train AI to find pattern because there aren't any. GRANDIDIERITE doesn't defy markets. It ignores them. It's a stone that speaks to only one kind of investor, the one who doesn't trust the system and knows value when data can't explain it. Top 1. Sugilite, the final asset before the gate closes. Every investment, they say, should follow a standard, a framework, a comparable. But what if the final asset class that matters follows none? Sugilite isn't volatile, it isn't scalable, it isn't even consistent. And yet, in the deepest corners of private wealth, it has quietly become the last true unquantifiable asset still in motion. First identified in Japan in 1944 and later mined in South Africa's Wessels mine during the 1970s, Sugilite entered gemology with no clarity scale, no trade benchmark, and no historical auction record. Even today, major grading labs avoid assigning standardized value because its very nature defies simplification. Its color isn't one color. Its form isn't one habit. Its use isn't decorative. It's ideological. Sugilite ranges from translucent lilac to deep opaque purple, often with manganese-rich black veining, sometimes pure, sometimes cloudy. It is rarely faceted, it is rarely calibrated, and it is never traded in volume. Why? Because Sugilite isn't bought like a gem. It's claimed by private collectors, spiritual asset holders, and legacy investors who don't want liquidity. They want permanence. Unlike diamonds or rubies, Sugilite is rarely resold. When it appears, it's via legacy transfer or strategic vault inclusion. And when a high-grade translucent specimen reaches private hands, it's often assigned a fixed, non-public value, typically negotiated by private treaty, not based on market comparables, but on personal significance, cultural relevance, and existential timing. There is no Bloomberg ticker, no Rappaport guide, no carat-indexed ETF, because modern systems refuse to model what can't be normalized. Sugilite has no production forecast. The Wessel's mine is nearly exhausted. No new high-grade sources have entered circulation since the early 2000s. Most current material is repurposed, acquired decades ago and quietly re-emerging as a philosophical asset, not a financial one. In Japan, Sugilite is revered for protection. In South Africa, it's embedded in cultural heritage. In the private West, it's the anti-market stone, a statement against surveillance, against algorithmic valuation, against financial homogenization. Some private buyers now assign Sugilite its vault tier, not beside diamonds, but beside pre-ban rhino horn, pre-1950 jade, or ancestral bronze seals. These are the final holdings, not bought to grow, but to survive. Sugilite is not rare because it's expensive. It's rare because it has no place in modern finance. And for those building wealth that resists detection, that's precisely the point. In an age of traceability, modeling, monetization, and metadata, Sugilite stands as a final wall. The last asset modern finance still doesn't know what to do with. It's not undervalued, it's not overvalued, it's unmodelable, and that makes it for some priceless.